No. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay, we're all back online, Maureen? Okay. So we've returned from executive session, no action. It is 6:31. Okay, we'll go into the budget now. District's 2024-25 budget.
All right, in front of you have a couple documents. One is the draft memo, which is the written summary, and then the actual budget itself. We are not taking action on this tonight. We are presenting it, and then you'll take action on next month. I wanted to point out just some general things about it. The yellow box at the top represent what your tax rate recommendations in the next agenda item will be. So what you'll hear next in the budget, in the text setting discussion, that number is in your budget, in this budget you're seeing, okay? So if we make changes to that, this will change. The last year we did a water and sewer rate study, and that created some rate changes in the regional water and sewer rates. We're not recommending any additional rate changes this year. It had been quite a few years since the last time it had been done, as of last year. And so we're not proposing any rate changes on the retail side this year. This does include the STRA changes to the wholesale water rate dropping, and then the sanitary or the wastewater staying constant. And you've already heard that before. And then the GRP rate dropping. So that's in here as well on this front page. Not a whole lot to really go over on the front page necessarily, unless you have questions. Usually folks want to talk about stuff on the back page, which is the expenses.
Bless you.
Budget services. Couple things to note on that. If you look at 5300.06 water service maintenance, you'll see, and I'm trying to point out kind of some of the bigger differences or changes from last year's budget. You'll see last year's budget was 2,600. This year's budget is 79,000, and so that's a big change. What that is attributed to is replacement of old commercial compound meters. And so the Woodlands converted to AMI ultrasonic smart meters on all the residential side. There was a decision made at that point for cost purposes, and two, because some of the larger diameter meters were not available. They weren't manufactured like they are now. So that they are now being manufactured at the larger sizes in an ultrasonic meter. And also the parts for the existing mechanical meters are becoming more obsolete. So what we're recommending is in 47, you have 13 meters that are the old larger diameter compound meters. And we're recommending to address the 3 and 4 inch, which means there are 3 more, I presume they're 6 inch or greater. But you have 10 3 inch and 4 inch meters. And so that's making up the majority of that big difference in your budget line item for that one. And one of the other reasons we're looking at that line item is, you may recall last year we hired an outside firm to audit your water system to see if there was any lost revenues that is generated by system leaks, by mechanical issues, could be billing issues, whatever the case may be. I think almost all, if not all, of the things that they have found, and they have found some things, were all related to these larger diameter commercial mechanical meters. Either they both have a low flow and a high flow component to them, and one or the other of those sides is stuck or reading too slow. Those are the types of errors or things that the audit company is finding. And so that would be another reason why we want to recommend getting those started swapping out and getting those ordered. It's a 6-month order time, so we propose to get them on the books pretty quick. And then you're not scheduled to pay for it until they come in. But we want to get them ordered pretty quick. So
So these are meters that would be at the Kroger shopping center that we have in our something like that. Okay.
that's right, any commercial, yep. And they are, have proven on the residential side to be more accurate than the old mechanical meters. So I would, yes, we would see some improvement there as well. In addition to preventing any getting caught on the audit stuff, because that deal was if that outside company found a problem, then we agreed to split the revenues, the new revenues that were found for the next 3 years. And then after 3 years, we would all be ours. So that was, it was revenue that was zeros or it happened to be correct.
So you're obligated to fix it.
On the ones they're finding, yeah.
So they participate in the delta on the revenue.
Right. And another thing would be, in terms of changing these two, would be to try to get out ahead and fix some that maybe haven't broken yet that they might find, because they're going to continue to audit for the next 3 years and find whatever they can find, which we want. We want them to find, where we might be losing revenue, but if we start changing these out, there's going to be less of an opportunity that'll be found as well.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so that's one big item. Let's see, some of the other items were pretty much the same. You'll see on 530009, the budget is the same, but you see the spend actual is less. And so that was for Santa Sewer rehab. If you recall, that project was broken into 3 phases, or we call it year 1, year 2, year 3, or phase 1, 2, 3. Phase 1 just got completed construction. Phase 2 is in design and is about to be approved, or will hopefully be approved with that. And then that'll go construction. When we budgeted last year, we budgeted for phase 1 and 2, and 2 we hadn't gotten to. So that's why some of that wasn't spent for 47. So that kind of rolls over.
Sorry, Eric, what was that for? San Jacinto River?
Sanitary sewer.
Sanitary sewer.
Yeah, sanitary sewer pipe, wastewater pipe. Yeah. So several years ago, there was an analysis done where you clean and televise, smoke test, and identify where your cracks and leaks are in your sewer system.
Okay.
And so the construction project is to tighten that up, either by lining or replacing broken pipe, or relining and reestablishing manholes that might have brought it out, basically.
Got it.
That's what that stuff is.
Got
And it was across the Woodlands on many districts. The other thing, 5314, it didn't go up too much, but what is included in there is a repair on your ditches, a repair of a backslope interceptor pipe. So on these ditches, you have a lot of corrugated metal pipe that comes into the ditch, and that's that old wavy metal pipe. And after 20, 30 years, it just disintegrates. And when it disintegrates, particularly if it's on the edge of a backyard or a fence, it'll pull the fence down, big open hole, etc. We had several of those last year in other districts. And so what we are doing is we're having that system audited to identify with our maintenance contractor to identify the condition of those pipes, how many of them we have, where they are, have we already fixed them yet? And we're going to take all that data and we're going to put it into our GIS database system, our mapping system. And then we're going to utilize that to develop a capital improvement plan for ditch piping for all the districts. And so I won't have that done until probably later this year. But in the meantime, I put into the budgets one of those major repairs in case it happens. They were running anywhere from 18 to 40,000. We put in 25,000 per district to have one. We may or may not have one. Hopefully we don't. But if we do, we'll have at least one budgeted item there. That was a swing item. Those were the major changes. One of the other things that we look at is that green line at the bottom. And so that represents your reserves of the budget. And so this is suggesting that with this budget, with the expenses and the projects I just mentioned, you would come out of the year, next year, at the end of the fiscal year, at about 7 months of reserves. Ideally, we would like that number to be between probably 12 and 16. So we're not there yet. What the significance of that is your ability to maneuver for issues and projects. So for instance, if the results of the audit for the storm pipe, ditch piping comes back and we have, 20 that are collapsing, well, that's a significant project, of which we don't necessarily have the ability to go out and sell a bunch of bonds for. You might want to pay out of cash. But you have the cash. And so that's one of the things we look at is, do you want to pay with, as you go with cash, or do you want to go sell bonds? And I'm not sure if we have any bond authorization left for 47, but, not much. So you don't have a lot of
No, we
options.
don't. You said all of that on the last bond issue.
So your only other opportunity to raise funds would be, if you got into a bad situation, would be to raise your water and sewer rates.
Do our bond covenants also tell us how many months of reserve that we have to have?
No, not for general obligation bonds, but the rating agencies do look at your reserves when they revisit your credit rating. So that is something that they look at.
So this is, it's not a horrible story. I mean, we're at 7 months and the amount of money that's there, just over 4 million, that's decent. We need to get it up, but, this allows you to do some of those projects and still kind of start growing it a little bit.
Aside from raising the rates, is there any other way to get that up?
Go back to the voters. And
What about some of this money that we have allocated to other projects that aren't doing anything, like the 1.7 for the Bear Branch project?
the 1.6 is what y'all share was. Yeah, we can talk about that in a minute. We'll do that. So that's allocated to other sources.
Yeah, but the path that you're on, I mean, this year got a really great opportunity with a drop off, and we'll talk about this in the next item, in your debt service to be able to really beef up your maintenance and operation tax this year, which is what's generating this surplus of 2.3 million this year. So you're able to go from 3 million of reserve to 6.9. So if you're able to continue that clip for a few more years, you'll get where you need to be. Because of this drop in the debt service tax rate that you're able to move over. It's a one-time deal. After this, you're going to be down to 4.25 on your debt service. So you're not going to get that type of opportunity many times in the mature phases of a district to be able to move over your debt service to M&O without triggering a rollback election, because the rollback election is calculated based on your total tax rate. So when you're able to move pennies from debt service to M&O, it doesn't increase your total tax rate. That's part of that 3.5% calculation. So this is a rare opportunity to capture, to be able to increase your basis for maintenance tax, so that when your debt service tax is gone completely, you've got a higher starting point for your maintenance tax that 3.5 will be calculated off of, and will allow you to get in a lot stronger financial position from a reserve perspective.
So we'll be looking at this next month for approval, and if there's any changes of significance, bring that to your attention. If there's no more questions immediately, probably a good time to jump into the tax rate setting, because it kind of correlates with this.
Good evening. On page 23 starts, you'll see a memo followed by 2 tables. I'll just remind you, tax rate setting process is a 2-step process. So all you're doing today is authorizing publication of your total tax rate. Next month, you will hold your public hearing and then adopt and levy the tax rate, and you'll break it out between maintenance and operations and debt service. So all that being said, if you look at assumption number 1, your January 1, 2024 certified came in at almost 3.2 billion. That's a 9% increase over last year's 2.9 billion. If you flip to the next page, this is your outstanding debt service, which gets paid off in 2029. Last year, you needed 8 cents. If you look in that middle column, you need 4.25 cents now. And I'll point out 3 columns from the right, your total debt service. The reason is if you see in 2024, you're paying off 2 million in principal and interest, and then moving forward, you're at about 1.4 million moving forward. So that's the reason for the decrease. And so if you flip to the next page, this is probably the most important informative information. Top box with respect to your maintenance and operations side of your budget. 2023 M&O rate was 9.5991 cents, which generated $2.7 million. This year's proposed rate is 12.3766 cents, which would generate about 3.9 million. Parity rate, if you wanted to raise the same number of dollars you did last year, you'd need about 8.8 cents. And then currently you need about 5.25 pennies to balance your budget. And then I always like to point out the value of 1 penny in your district is $315,549. Middle box with respect to tax bills, and this is how the 3.5% with respect to Senate Bill 2 is calculated. If you look at last year's average homestead, it's $368,213, meaning the average tax bill for your homestead residents was $648. This year, that average went up to $403,386. So that means the average tax bill, assuming you propose this 16.6266 total tax rate, would generate a tax bill of about $671 or a $23 increase to the overall tax bill, 3.5%. And as Brian mentioned, with respect to Senate Bill 2, you're designated as a developed district. So if you choose to go beyond 3.5% average tax bill increase, then it would be a mandatory rollback election. You would have to go to the voters in order to approve that. If it failed, then if you look at the bottom box, the bottom line, your 2024 M&O rollback rate would be 9.06 cents. So the proposed 12.3766 would drop to 9.06. When it comes to a rollback, the debt service tax rate cannot be impacted because that's pledged to outstanding principal and interest, so it would only impact your M&O rate. So all that being said, and what Brian was alluding to, this is a 1-year choice to move pennies over, because moving forward, you'll still be capped at 3.5%. So if you drop it this year, you can't capture anything beyond the 3.5% unless you go to the voters. So it used to be 8%, and then the residents would have to petition for a rollback, and that's still the case for a developing district. And so districts would move pennies back and forth as needed, but the legislature lumped us in with counties, school districts, and so here we are. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm trying to understand the bottom number, the last number, the 2023, you said the M&O rollback rate. You said if we went to try to get more and he went to a rollback election and failed, it would fall to the 0.0906.
Right.
Help me understand why that's less than where we are. I don't understand that process.
So the average M&O rate would not be able to go more than 3.5% increase. And so last year at 9.
It's confusing, is the short answer.
Because we're not going to a rollback election. We're going to fall. If we failed it, we go back below where we would go without it. It just makes no sense to me.
How the division is done under the statute, which is a bit wonky. So to determine whether or not you're subject to a rollback election, it's generating over 3.5% more revenue on the total tax rate. Okay.
Right.
So
which is your M&O plus your debt.
Correct.
Right.
And so you can move those pennies over and still keep it within that 3.5% range. If you exceed that, the legislature can't roll back a debt service tax rate. You have law covenants to levy geo debt, general obligation debt without limitation as to rate or amount. So the only way they can pare you back is to pare back your M&O. And so they say, okay, if you go over, then you can only levy 3.5% more on your M&O. So then it ends up having an outsized impact on your M&O rate. So that's why you definitely don't, you don't want to go over anyway, but you definitely don't want to go
That
over a
makes sense.
situation like this because it's going to hammer you on your M&O rate.
Thank you.
But it is,
Yeah, it didn't just jump out at me right there. So, okay,
The
thank
fact that we need to build our cash position for M and O in the next 3 years or so
correct.
makes this a good opportunity.
Correct. You're able to only have a 3.5% or $40 impact on your taxpayers, but you're able to significantly beef up your reserve because you're getting this one-time opportunity to go from 8 cents debt service to 4.25. So you're picking up 3.75 pennies without touching your rate at 315,000 per penny.
So if we get a future jam in year 2 or 3, we're not scrambling around trying to.
Correct.
roll
As you
back
reset your thesis on the M&O, so once that debt service is gone, that 3.5 will be calculated on your new M&O, and you've been able to basically have a stepped up basis.
Yeah.
For that M&O.
You're still lowering the rate overall.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, magic, which is
Yeah.
also good.
That's good.
And you'll have one more choice to do that again in roughly 5 years when you pay off your debt.
We published the rate.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Appreciate the explanation. Okay, that's that. We adopted the rate. We do everything we need to do, Brian, I think.
Yeah, we authorized notice to be published in the
Right.
Courier, so next month it'll come back to actually do the public hearing and adopt the rate.
What does it mean? The means, the means, that's the courier,
Correct.
that we did that too?
Right.
Okay, good. Okay. All right.
So that's the only thing is the courier, you don't have to put it online or,
So we do have a notice that will go.
A lot of people don't read the
on
Courier.
website.
just saying.
Yeah, so the legal requirement is to put it in the newspaper in general circulation. So, it's an antiquated deal. The newspapers still love it because nobody really advertises much in the papers. So this is really when they make their money. This is Black
And
Friday.
guy is gonna love you walking in with this
Black
thing.
Friday for the newspaper business.
Friday,
This is
yeah.
where they actually get to generate some revenue. So we still have to publish in the paper, even though you're right. Not a lot of people read it. And I think we do put it on the website.
We do, because it has to,
Gotcha.
County courthouse.
the county tax office.
Oh, tax office, yeah. On the window.
No, on their website.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's like voting.
Yeah, okay. All right, item 11, SRA Woodlands Division report. Ed, good evening.
Our report starts on page 26, excuse me. The blend ratio that we're at right now, the goal was 50-50. We're at 48-52, groundwater versus surface water, and you can see on the left the volumes that we're at. Normal production, you can see on the chart on 27 where we are and how it compares to previous years for August and July. Obviously, August is a very busy month with water sales. Infrastructure maintenance is on 28. We are still waiting on financials. We started a ERP back in April, and this is across the board with all our divisions, with all our customers. We don't have financials out of the new ERP. We can pay bills, but we haven't been able to pull monthly statements. But as soon as we have something, we will obviously share that with you.
Making payroll, I assume.
Oh, yes. Yes, thankfully.
Ed, I had a question, just, reflecting on the amount of rain we had, earlier this summer, right? Okay. Do you always just bring both the groundwater and the surface water down kind of together? Or do you try to go to the surface water or go to the groundwater reduction first? Is there a method to that or a logic to it, or is it?
The logic is we're delivering equally year round.
You're trying to achieve the 50/50.
Yes.
Right, but if you get a kind of a bonus bunch of rain.
And it tends to, winters, both are slow, both groundwater and surface water are a little slow. And so it pretty much is made up during, June through end of September, sometime into October.
Bad, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to remind you all, 85% of our groundwater is coming out of the Upper Jasper Aquifer.
Yeah.
The remaining 15% is out of the Evangeline. Project information is on pages 30 through several, 36. And then the acronyms at the back. Groundwater reduction plan report starts on page 38. And it gives you basically the information on where we are on where the other entities that receive surface water on page 39, where they are and the delivery that we provide to them, and then the ratio of how much surface water, groundwater that they're receiving. Again, no financials at GRP. The waterline condition-based assessment update is on page 43. We're 9% in, and out of, remember, 27% into the project. The progress to date, we have a draft condition assessment plan that has been submitted to us. Chris mentioned in the board meeting prior to this that it's been submitted, but it must still be at the project manager's desk because he has not seen it, and neither have I. And then there are some articles on page 44 to make you aware of what's occurring in the area, some of the things on our staff, and some of the articles we shared. You go to page 45, there are some corrections that we need to offer. Our latest report would be as of August 7th. And so on your first chart that has the percentages where it says phase 1 ESAs, that's 50% complete. And the meets and bounds surveys is 75% complete. And then year to date, his spent is $109,761. And on the project itself, we're 8.98% complete. No appraisals have been accomplished and no offers have been extended. And then I'll ask Shelley to provide on the Google Drive. We provided a Bear Branch maintenance summary. And it didn't make this package, but essentially we've inspected the grounds on 7/5, 7/10, 7/25. Obviously from the hurricane and from the some of the floods early in late May and June. There are a number of trees down in the Bear Branch drainage system, and we're working with our contractor to get those cut up and out of the way. But other than that, no fence damage, a little graffiti on the dam, which is typical, but nothing else. Be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ed? Okay, good. Thank you, Ed. The attorney's report, Brian?
So first, item number 12, the Bear Branch, Panther Branch project update there. We are working with, this is item number 12. We are working with the River Authority as well as with LJA, the engineer, to notify the Texas Water Development Board about the delay in the project due to the additional modeling that was required and now the additional costs that are projected. The grant agreement between Bud 67 and the Texas Water Development Board requires that there be a project schedule, a projected project schedule included. That project schedule anticipated construction to begin at the end of April of this year, which obviously hasn't happened. And the project to be completed late June of next year, which isn't going to happen. the grant agreement requires that 67 have an amendment. We'll first notify the Water Development Board and then have an amendment to that grant agreement to address the contract schedule. So LJ and River Authority are working on that. Also, a budget had to be included, a projected budget had to be included with the grant agreement. That obviously is no longer good either. And so River Authority and LJ are working on a new projected budget, and we have to notify the Texas Water Development Board if there's going to be a shortfall, which obviously right now there is, unless the scope changes, which I know some of that was talked about at One Water. But that's where we are on the Texas Water Development Board side in terms of the grant and some dates and notifications we're going to need to do with them.
Yeah, as far as the project itself.
Yeah, I kind of skipped over 12. Sorry about that.
No, that's it. We're good. So as you recall, the engineer came to you in June and presented kind of an update, and that's where we first kind of learned that it looks like the updated cost estimates for at least the proposed solution, which was to develop 2 detention ponds there at Research and Gosling, and then to underbrush both Bear Branch and Panther Branch, both of those ditches. We found out that there was some additional funds needed to cover the project. So that was in June. Over the next month, we talked a little bit about, what are some of the next steps. One option was to start take the model that's been built now and run different scenarios at it, see if there's a better solution than the one that, the path we're down. The other idea was to see if there's some additional funding somewhere out there. So we actually had a meeting yesterday where we invited Representative Toth and Congressman Crenshaw's office. They both attended. Crenshaw didn't, his staff member did. Steve Toth did attend. A couple members from the township and several MUD directors, stakeholders attended the meeting. We had the engineer basically give the presentation that you heard in June to educate the legislators on the project itself, and discussed in general if there were some state or federal funding that might be available to bridge the gap of where we were. Through the discussion, it didn't appear that there's maybe any immediate funds. There may be some smaller opportunities where we can get at some funds to help. There was a lot of discussion about, well, now that we have the model built, we can run different scenarios at it. Folks said, well, did you look at this? And did you look at this? And what about this idea? And a lot of those things were looked at the very beginning with the old model, which was the 1983 model. But those different scenarios, and it was identified early on at that point that some of those other ideas didn't appear to be create as big a benefit as what this option looked to create. If you recall, the intention of the project, in addition to addressing street flooding in the neighborhoods, and really the reason we're talking about is addressing the water elevation of this along Research Forest Drive in the Cochran's Crossing high school area. So Flagstone Path on the south side, Lake Miss Circle on the north side. Those are different streets that have reoccurring issues on those heavier rainfall events. The project as it sits today with the modeling that's been done, identified that, and they kind of went into the project, I wasn't here, but they kind of went into the project with some expectations of trying to basically on a certain event, rainfall event, which the rainfall event that was modeled was the tax day rainfall event. So if that were to occur again, then the project would lower the elevation of where that water got to in Research Forest down by about 2 feet, which would allow emergency vehicles to get up and down Research Forest. The side effect to that as well is the immediate subdivisions on both sides of research that I just mentioned would also have similar reductions in the water surface elevation along their streets. That's where we are today, but at a cost that doesn't fit these numbers that I just presented. So I think, so I'm basically sharing this update with each of the stakeholder MUDs. And I think that from the dialogue that we heard yesterday from different stakeholder MUDs was maybe it makes sense to look at some of those other scenarios, at least that we could just pluck them off and say, yep, that's no good, and see if there's, another option out there that reduces the cost and still accomplishes the goal that we're trying to accomplish of reducing surface water or water along a research corridor. So what I've asked the engineer to do is to come to us with a proposal to do several different runs, scenario runs at the model. Things like folks were saying, well, what if we dug out Bear Branch more? Or what did we look at Lake Woodlands, or, a couple other different options. So that's essentially what they'd bring back to us next month, and then we can decide where to go from here. So we still have to address the situation that Brian mentioned. That is in relation to, so if you recall, for those that weren't here, you may not have known this, but the project currently has 11.6 million in the bank ready to go for the project. What was reported back in June from the engineer was we're going to need another 6 or 8 million to get, based on the preliminary estimates that they had come up with at the time. That 11.6 million in change is made up of what's on here, which is MUD 67 went out and sold a bond for 6.55 million. None of the other stakeholders were a part of that. So part of what we have to do is get either an extension and or just go something along the lines with Texas Water Development Board on 67's behalf, at least to clean that piece of it up. The rest of the stakeholder MUDs are in the box below, and that makes up the second line item from the top, which is 4 million. So 4 million was split amongst the rest of the shareholders in those percentages down below. And so that was put in via cash. So that money, and what has been expended thus far is only monies from the bond. So none of the other, the grant nor the 4 million has been touched. Because the idea was we need to use the bond funds first to get through that, and then we'll chew through the rest of it as the project proceeds. But project hasn't proceeded, so.
So yeah, when did it kind of slow down and stop? Didn't it just kind of peter out there? Because it started in 2021?
The discussion started in 2018 and 19, and there was some initial discussion about the modeling.
And then funding was in 2021?
No, the dates are on there, 2022. Yeah, but
Sorry, it's hard to read.
No, it's okay.
Glasses.
Yep, understand. No, the funding was acquired back in 2022, and then that kind of kicked off all of the modeling. So originally the modeling was to be completed last fall. It took a little bit longer, so they finished it earlier this year and then presented it. I saw it probably in April or May originally, and we asked for a little bit more clarification on some things, and then it was presented in June.
So originally we thought it was going to be about 10 million, 11 million. That's why we got 11. And so now it's up to like close to 20. How many houses were affected or will be affected by the project?
I'd have to dig into all the.
And what mud are those houses in is another good question, because I think the benefit to MUD 47 from this project, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's solely that it would be for transportation, and emergency vehicles would be able to get down research, and people would be able to go back and forth, east and west, getting across that big pond that happens at the high school, basically. So
Yeah, there's definitely a safety concern on getting safety vehicles through research. There's no doubt about that.
The solution talks about a linear park being built here if we go with alternative number 2. And what I'm curious about is if the residents knew that a linear park was in the cards, how would they feel about that? Because it's real private back there right now. and they probably can't even see across Bear Branch, but we're gonna thin it out and take out the underbrush. And I think of what the reaction is going to be in the public. There's that, and if we go with one of these alternatives, it's cutting down a lot of trees along Gosling. And that
There's
was
definitely a trade-off between the tree people and the flooded people.
That's the question, like,
Some people are mad on one side and some people
Yeah.
care less about the trees.
Yeah.
And so that's gonna be the,
Historically, Mud 47, when the tax day flood happened, Mud 47, we've had some flood victims. I would say a lot of them were in the Alden Bridge section of Mud 47. Fallen Stone, though, and Cascade Springs had some flooding, and Mud 47 addressed every single issue. And we spent about $1.7 million of our own money. We had the cash, and LJA took on every project, came in and gave us the updates. So we really, I feel like Mud 47 addressed our flooding issues back then. And this is, and a lot of Mud 47 residents live back in Alden Bridge and have traffic issues when research floods. So that's the benefit to us, is the transportation that would be fixed by this.
This initial breakout, right, of this initial 4 million, the percent, okay, that was used here, was that based on kind of the estimate of the model on the flooded area? Like each, like proportionally to how much each mud was affected by the flooding, and that's how we arrived at these numbers?
yeah, so I talked to the engineer about that. He provided basically two different maps. I can provide that to you. But essentially, there's a drainage area that feeds both of those branches. So they looked at the overall acreage that feeds those two, and then they cross-referenced that with the amount of homes that they had on record that had flooded in various districts. So they kind of cross-referenced the two and came up with an overall split that you
So
see.
it's home driven, not necessarily just raw acreage. I mean,
Right. They took into consideration the raw acreage, but he said it really kind of took more consideration into the amount of homes that flooded in those events.
But each district's pro rata share was arbitrarily reduced by Metro's contribution.
That's a good point.
Rarely or ratably?
Yeah, Metro has no water going to it. But they
Right.
put
It's a transportation.
Yeah.
When I say arbitrarily, I mean it went down, each district's percentage contribution went down because Metro put in a
Gotcha.
flat number
Yeah,
to be on the
Okay.
basis of town center needing to be able to have mobility and values there in town center.
Yeah.
For their contribution for the drainage perspective.
Yeah, from the township's perspective, there was discussion in the meeting that, because there was more focus, not necessarily on the areas that Laura's talking about, but the detention ponds themselves. Those are two large chunks of land that are really heavily treed right now on the northwest side of Gosling and Research. And there was talk about developing kind of a multi-use or multi-purpose facility because it was indicated that the Woodlands is a little light on ball fields from a needs perspective. They didn't get into the details specifically, and but said that could be a possibility to address some of the concerns about trees being removed to solve this issue. So a lot of discussion. A lot of good discussion, but again, I think where we go from here is maybe sharpen our pencil on the model, run some scenarios through it, and just see if there's a silver bullet somewhere that more fits within the budget that we have. I would tell you that if we can't get a certain amount of drop in that water surface elevation, it's not worth doing. We either because if we're still at 18 inches or 2 feet in water along that corridor, emergency vehicles still can't get through. So this isn't about just doing a little bit to try to solve a little bit of the problem. You either get there or you don't, because we're talking about, and again, that same drop will go across the communities.
Was Greenbridge flood? Because Greenbridge is a way to go from research up to, what does it go into, 242?
Big dip down. I've never seen research flood and I've been here for 12 years. Now, I may not have gone by there. Where does it flood at?
That's a high school.
School.
Yeah.
In almost every.
Like
heavy
Cat's
rain,
Cradle.
It's probably been
Yeah.
6 times this year.
How long does it stay? I mean,
It's west of Branch Crossing. It's down at that low spot. It's probably done it 6 times just this year. In 3 weeks ago, when we had 7 inches in 2.5 hours, I was stuck. I was southbound on Crown Ridge, trying to get home, and looking westbound on Research. There was 2 Mustangs with water up to their window down Research.
Crown Ridge and Research?
Crown Ridge and Research, looking westbound in both directions. So westbound, and then as I went through the intersection going south, coming eastbound, but down the same hill, coming this way, there was another car, actually 2 cars. One had made it up to the drive point, but stalled out and ruined the car. And so there was 2 cars
How
underwater
quickly does it run off?
within an hour.
I was gonna say, because I don't know how many times a day I'd ride up and down Research and during major rains. And I've always been impressed that, wow, you think right there by like Bear Branch, where the river or the stream goes across, where it kind of gets up high. I've never seen it really go over. And I've always, I mean, even at Harvey, maybe
This
not right
wouldn't
in the
solve
middle.
that Crown Ridge issue. That's way west of here.
It'd be part of it. Now,
Okay, I'll bet you a buck, because that's way west. That's Del Webb material.
right, so
That's that's
the part of the,
behind the dam
Yeah.
even.
the part of the program, so the way that the proposed project would work is they would go back up those ditches, and they would underbrush those ditches to where you're moving the water out of that area faster, right? Everything's wanting to go down to the east and east southeast. And so the idea is you start clearing it out to move the water faster. The problem with moving the water faster is you cannot flood the people. Now that you're moving it faster, you got to slow it down at some point before you flood the people downstream of that. So that's where the detention ponds come in. So you move it faster out of these areas that flood, and then you capture it in the detention pond and then release it at a rate that the downstream areas are used to seeing. You can't increase that. You can't keep it speeding it up and just keep, pushing it downstream.
It was an
Go to
issue.
where how many houses are affected when we have flooding? How often do we have flooding? And if we do the project, how many of those houses will be alleviated from the flooding? I mean, it's really a cost benefit analysis, right? I mean,
To a certain
if it's
degree.
$20 million or $25 million or better, but it sounds like it keeps moving up because of inflation or whatnot. I want to see those.
Yeah,
Those
yeah,
are-
that's part of it. I think the bigger part is the safety issue. I mean, when I was sitting there at that intersection, no emergency vehicle could get down to that car that was underwater. Because there was a police officer sitting there, not letting anyone go further past.
Yeah.
But no emergency vehicle could get down to that person that was underwater flooded. I'm assuming they were out of the car. I'm sure they
It
were.
was an issue though, that Crown Ridge flooding, that we wanted Charlie Riley to address because it's his precinct and it was a mobility issue and it's a drainage pipe that's not wide enough. And so the water comes over the road instead of going underneath it right there. And it was identified.
Yeah, the one certainly at Branch Crossing is, the west of Branch Crossing is, this is further east than the one you're talking about. So that water comes in from an undeveloped property along 1488, and it pours out in and there's a ditch across the street going south away from Research. The water is just pouring out of this undeveloped property, and it has to turn and make about a 30-foot turn into the storm sewer that then goes under the road, and it can't make that turn. And so that's the one that I was mentioning that about 6 times this year, because that's the way I come in and out to get home. So I've seen it a number of times where the sheriff's office will be blocking the road, so you can't get. There's been a number of times this year I couldn't even get home.
That's on the stretch from where Crown
Branch
Ridge going back to,
Branch Crossing west to Egypt.
okay.
Branch Crossing to Egypt. That,
And there's
there's a
almost,
big low spot right there.
yeah,
That's not, by the way,
close,
that's.
close to where Branch Crossing is.
I'm sorry.
Close to Branch Crossing, right?
Pretty,
Yeah.
pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So you're only just cutting off, turning left on Branch Crossing, basically.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that this would do much for that. That's another issue for sure.
That's the very back.
Yeah, it's a little bit different. So
Okay,
that's the update. Sorry.
thank you for that. No, it's good. Good discussion. So you're done, Brian, on
Yeah.
your attorney's report?
Got a question on that. So is there any talk on moving this to Woodlands One Water? Or is it with Woodlands One Water? I'm kind of confused at that because weren't they talking about this project? I talked to a couple of people who were there yesterday. Weren't they talking about this at Woodlands One Water? I'm just trying to understand how that works into it.
The idea of One Water is just grabbing regional stakeholders to sit in a room and talk. That's all it is. But there's no funds associated with that. It's more of getting the different regional stakeholders in the room to talk about various projects or
Okay.
problems. This is just one of them.
Ultimately,
That's-
MUD
that's where I got
67
confused with.
will be deliberating what to do next, right?
Mhm.
When is MUD 67 meeting? Has it already happened this week?
Tomorrow, but there's not anything to do in the, immediately, other than go through the steps of what you have to do with the development board, with the grant agreement. Other than that, it's just, a search mission to try to find additional funding or find a way to do the project more efficiently or, more creatively, value engineering that will reduce the cost down to what we have. I mean, there's no magic. We either find a way to do it cheaper, faster, more efficiently to cut the cost, or we find some other entity that can provide the funds for the gap, because MUDs don't have it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not an option to say, hey, MUDs, can you come up with another, 4+ million? That's not an option.
And the other issue that has been an issue is that we're not managing what's happening, especially MUD 47. We have no idea what's been going on with our money we sent that way. But MUD 67 really isn't either. MUD 67 had a couple of people at the One Water meeting yesterday, and I'm glad they were there, but they weren't a part of the main board. And I'm glad that they are now. So going forward, I hope that for our 1.6 million contribution, we have some management, or we have some say still in how this moves forward. So that's it.
Largest contributors, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we good? Let's move on. Say, item 14, we're gonna go over the arbitrage rebate calculations report.
Yeah.
That's fun stuff there.
So,
Oh, yeah.
So you've got an abbreviated version of that report. Interim report, I'll emphasize in your packet. So these reports, there's another one that's in the process of being prepared for this bond issue. These are prepared in 5-year intervals. We're 4 years in. We talked about the structural change in interest rates, how historically the amount of interest that you could get on your invested funds were very low, 1% at best, while your bonds were usually 3-4%. So you were earning less in interest than you were paying in interest on your bonds. Well, that has structurally flipped. Now you're issuing bonds at the same or less than where your interest rates are, or bonds that were issued several years ago when rates were 2-3%, or now if you have funds, they're being invested at 5% plus, like we see on the report. So that's triggered concerns about arbitrage rebate requirements to the IRS, and we talked about this a little bit in a previous meeting. So what we talked about before was having the arbitrage specialists prepare an interim report before it was due, because you won't have a final report for another year or so, to give us an idea of, do we think we're going to owe arbitrage? We can kind of eyeball it and think, yeah, probably so, but need to see a report, an interim report that gives us a little better idea of whether some of the funds in our capital projects account can't actually be used for a project because they're going to be owed to the IRS, because the rule is you can't go issue public debt and then be able to invest it at a higher rate and keep that. That is arbitrage, which is return without risk. So we do have that interim report. It does indicate that there would be, as of the time of this report, which was March of 20 to March of 24, would owe right under $205,000 to the IRS out of the fund. Yeah, pretty healthy number. And like I said, there's one more report for this bond issue that needs to be prepared as well for you. So what I've asked Maureen to do is take out, we'll probably move 250 or 300,000 from your general capital projects account that is reflected on page 11 in your report, that Texas class that has about 7 million. Open a separate Texas class account with, if we want to be conservative, stick 300,000 in there, just to make it clear to us that we can't spend that money, because the worst case scenario, and thankfully we haven't had it happen yet, but what we worry about is the district thinking, oh, I've got this money in capital projects, I need to go do this project, and then you get hit with a $300,000 tax bill and you got to draw down your operating reserve to pay the IRS. That's what you don't want to have happen. So we're trying to stay out in front of that and have these reports prepared early, so we start to get a sense of, you're not going to know the exact number until the final reports are done, but at least we get a sense of scale and can start to segregate some of those funds so that you don't inadvertently spend those and then end up having to pay the IRS out of operating. So that's where we are. Yeah. No actions necessary.
Putting that together. I know we had chatted about that a couple times. That was the original last bond we did, and we talked about it. So thanks for pulling that together for us. Appreciate it.
Right,
And it's
all.
a good solution. I like it. Okay, so now we have a kind of special topic, the 1488, a new 1488 project, not the old one, the new
We
one.
have people here. We had to answer questions for y'all on the 1488 projects we talked about many times
Yeah.
before.
That'd be great if we just tell us what's going on there.
We got to finish talking about this.
Yeah, that's not this. So it's totally different.
And so no real change from the last time we discussed this.
Okay.
Outside of, obviously things are moving forward, but
We've changed. We weren't on the board before.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
we missed that.
as far as the construction timeline, the next month meeting, I should have a firm date on when we anticipate starting. It was conveyed to me that the sports complex itself is making some minor adjustments, and they should be hot on our heels with their pre-site work once we wrap up what we have to do over there as well. So next month, I should have a little bit more as far as like hard dates with start, what we're gonna do, and then by then, everything should be ironed out on what that sports complex is gonna.
How long do you think construction would take once it starts?
Do like for what we're gonna do, or for the whole
For the-
project, the entire project?
Well, both would be interesting.
That I could not tell you, because I'm personally not building the sports complex, so there are means and methods I couldn't get into that.
But
But
for your part,
for the WS&D, again, next month, let me get you some firm dates. I don't have that off the top of my head
Okay.
right now.
I'm not familiar with it as far as would someone going to this complex be able to access it without leaving the Woodlands and going out on 1488?
I don't believe so.
I don't think they could go through that parking lot of the shopping center on the west side.
Sometimes I do things like that, go through.
You gotta snake your way through. I don't know if you can make it all the way that far though.
Okay.
Yeah, where is it exactly?
West of the CVS.
Yeah.
Right next to the CVS.
Okay.
Other way.
No, it's other side of Kirkendall.
The other T. There you go.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes get a piece of the pie there that was kind of messed up as far as their plot of land.
They're still working on that and working with Conroe to be able to get their consent for this district to annex that property. That is in the works.
So you guys are building a sports complex?
No, they're not.
Oh.
Developer is.
It's gonna put people off. It's on a pad site to somebody who's gonna build that.
So is it just one complex or is it,
I'm just trying to get my head around. So, and, you know, I wasn't here back then, but I think we donated, what, $4 million of
well, we
land.
set aside money,
Right.
yeah.
So you have a reimbursement agreement with Howard Hughes for them to construct public infrastructure, water, sewer, drainage that would be conveyed to the district for ownership and operation. Howard Hughes would be eligible for reimbursement for the cost of that public infrastructure, subject to there being sufficient value, taxable value created on that property. So the way they create value is either they self-develop and build something, Howard Hughes builds something there, or they sell pad sites to end user developers who build their own build-to-suit buildings. And I think what Marshall's talking about is basically a pad site type of arrangement or build-to-suit that end user is developing themselves. But the value from that end user will be able to be used toward the value creation necessary for the district to pay for the cost of the public infrastructure.
It's outside of the Woodlands, right?
No, it's within the woodlands. It's within Mud 47. There's a small piece on the far western end that is not in Mud 47. That's what we're talking about. That the development company is working on obtaining city of Conroe consent. It's a piece that the ETJ boundaries up there are all kind of goofy between city of Houston, south of 1488, and then Conroe has worked their way west along 1488. So you've kind of got this confluence of ETJs.
Yeah.
And that little piece is in Conroe's ETJ. So it would have to have Conroe approval as opposed to Houston approval in order for Mud 47.
So what's the break even timeline?
Break even timeline.
That it would make it worth our while to give them the $4 million.
Well, the district holds the funds until the developer performs, and
Right.
either the developer does or doesn't perform. And maybe they would partially perform. Maybe they create enough value to get 50% of their costs reimbursed. It's just math.
Yeah.
It's a formula, how much value to create versus how much did the infrastructure cost. And if they don't create, if various developments that they self-develop or sell pad sites don't create sufficient value, then they get 50% or 60% or whatever that number is. But
Yeah.
it's a function of the taxable value created on this property.
and the break even, so we're in it for 4 million. It starts it starts to generate revenue, tax revenue to us, but that break even, that was what I thought you might be
That's what
talking
I'm talking
about.
Yeah.
That's each 50 years or something. I'll
I
be dead.
don't know in terms of the tax revenue generated, I don't know what that number is. It's going to be a function of what is your
Whatever.
tax
I
rate.
just wonder if they gave them $4 million or we do end up giving them $4 million. How long is it going to take us to recoup that money? That's what I'm getting at.
So we have an
We've
agreement.
already issued those bonds.
Yes.
So it's already, I mean, you've already.
We want to
already
start getting
issued
money.
Those
That's
bonds
right. Yeah.
and those bonds will be paid off in a few years. So it's not a matter of imposing additional tax on your residents in order to.
Right, but I'm talking about that piece that we gave it for, I understand that everyone's paying for it. How long until that, if you're doing the accounting for it, you should easily be able to break out that one little piece of how much, revenue it's going to generate for us and pay back the 4 million or whatever it was we gave.
So, yeah,
Someone had to do some analysis on that.
It wasn't great,
yeah.
but we have an executed document between us and Howard Hughes. So last year, we went back to Howard Hughes and talked to them about modifying it. Instead of doing the old, was it Con 10 or what was it called?
Content.
Yeah, so Brian drafted a proper agreement, which is up to the modern standards. And we worked on that hard, and we talked with Howard Hughes and said, hey, we got to have a different outcome than the one we've just kind of been sitting in if we can work together. And since really nothing had happened and there was really no development at the time. So it's been materially changed as far as the timing and sequencing of any payments that would happen. The big money gets spent when a retention pond needs to be built for flooding. And that's only if you start developing the whole piece.
Yeah.
Right now, this first phase is de minimis. And what we should probably do is if you want to look through the agreement, which we have now, which Howard Hughes has signed, you can look at it and see what now the terms are that have, I think, improved substantially. We still have an obligation. We can't just unilaterally, kind of back out of it.
I'm not trying to say, bro, I'm just.
So we had a negotiated outcome, which I think was a good, I appreciate Howard Hughes came forward. Dan Colchurst was very good at saying, hey, this makes sense. Let's do it. And Brian took the lead on it. And we worked together and got I think a much better outcome. This arbitrage analysis is on that money, actually, that's sitting in our bank account, right? It's burning more and more than we probably should,
Right.
From an equity standpoint. So you got to
Have zero
refund it.
interest bonds.
Yeah.
Especially what you have.
Thankfully, they were inexpensive, but the analysis, maybe if you want to do it in your own time, there was a presentation done at our second meeting, June of 2022. That Jan came in right there, and you can go watch that video. It's a fun video. It's a great video. And look at her analysis and look at the analysis.
How much time I spend watching these videos.
And you can get some of the answers, I think, with that, and happy to kind of chat with you, or maybe if you guys want to take a look at this agreement. I think it's a good thing to be familiar with. It's what we're now obligated to do.
Yeah.
They've got to get 50% more complete. They've got to develop 50% of this
So this
before
is
we owe anything, any money.
Right. So this is what we're talking about right here.
This is
right?
a new one. This is different.
Okay, because I know that
This is-
with the stream right here.
That's
it does
not what we're talking about now.
Over here.
We're about to talk about that.
Okay.
That's a new project,
All
a
right.
separate one.
Do you remember the meeting when you talked about the new content? You
Absolutely.
do. What month was it? Do you remember that much detail?
It was June of 2020.
June of 20.
2022, sorry, June of 2022. Yeah, it was our second MUD meeting after the election. I remember it well. But I've slept since then, so I don't know
Yeah.
how much of it is right. I might be making stuff up, but no. That's online. Go take a look at it if you want. And I made a lot of comments about what the bail was.
Oh, sure.
Great, let me tell you. So I think we have a better agreement. We certainly are working well with Howard Hughes. We're not going to have to pay any money out for a while.
Yeah.
So the real question, kind of some on my mind, is how long do we just not use this money and hold it in reserve? We're going to have some other bills coming our way. We're going to have some capital projects coming our way with water and the wastewater. We know that, right?
We were able to put a performance time period in the.
Yes.
In the.
Yes, we did.
revised-
Yes, we did, which is really good. That was because otherwise it was
put in.
30 years or whatever. So we, no, get it done or we're done. So it was good. It was a good rate outcome, I think.
Yeah.
Good negotiated outcome, right?
Sounds good.
Yeah. So we want to talk about, so thanks for that on that little piece. And we talk about a new 1488 project.
New 1488.
Oh,
Let's hear about it.
So to give you some background,
Up here, just for all you people.
it's not the square, but the notch. There you go.
Right next to HEB.
Right at the,
Correct.
oh, yes.
Yep.
On the east.
Yeah.
Behind the Burger King.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
It's not our land. I mean, we don't own it in our mud and it's not Howard Hughes land. It's a piece of.
It's an orphan.
It is.
Nobody wants it. It's looking for a home.
Somebody does.
Those are residents on Trail Lois.
Yes,
Land?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes, they are.
We're on three sides of that.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
two
thank
sides.
you.
I live fairly close to there.
So
If you want to kind of give us the,
we get called all the time about inquiries about, hey, can this district serve this, or would they be interested in annexing that? We have another one in 47 right now that we said no to. It's a tiny little thing, makes no sense. This one, I guess, piqued my interest enough to bring it to y'all because it's about a 19 acre, it's just almost 20 acres, just under 20 acres. We were approached by a developer that is really trying to figure out what, would the district have any interest in annexing it? There's some, because of just being able to develop in the woodlands and some of the rules and requirements in order to do so on the design side of things, there's a few pieces of the process that the developer would need to go through. They're proposing at this point, they are a nationwide, I believe it was, apartment developer, looking to do an apartment deal that, you know, they call it Class A apartments. They showed, we had a meeting with them, where they kind of showed what their typical Class A looks like, the amenities that it has, that type of thing. What would need to occur, well, first off, we thought that it was sizable enough and it would bring in some revenue with potentially very little need for improvement in terms of bringing water and sewer drainage through the tract. I don't believe that there would be any debt associated with it. So it would be a situation where they would be responsible for bringing whatever line work to the property, and then you would just recoup the assessed value. There wouldn't be any reimbursement like we just talked about on the other deal. There's no, presumably there wouldn't be any public infrastructure necessary. So the lines they would extend, they would just extend as private up to their deal. That's the delineation between you spending money on a deal and not. Is there public facilities contemplated or not? You don't reimburse for private facilities. You would only reimburse for public facilities, water, sewer, drainage, that's it. And in this case, I don't think there would be any. So, you know, you're looking at an annexation of the property. The township would need to look at that as well. We would certainly have to look to see if there's capacity, water and sewer capacity. We would definitely require that they prove to us that the drainage works. We don't want to have any, wouldn't want to have any ill effects to the community around it. They would propose, and this was just a rough land plan that they showed, but that about 15 of the 19 would be apartment, and then the front portion along 1488 would be mixed commercial of some sort, typical to what you see all along there. So based on its size and the potential assessed value,
400 units, I think, is what they said.
I think that may change. I think once they dig into Woodlands development standards and tree buffers and anything else that you guys might want to buffer along along the residences, you certainly want to take that into consideration. If you do, that probably squeezes their developability in terms of units. So if they thought 400 might end up being 300, whatever the number is, but they would have to satisfy whatever requirements that you would want to put in. The decision, I think, the first decision that probably needs to be contemplated is if it is even a situation that you want to even consider. The reasons why you might want to consider it is that if you don't consider it, then you have no control over what goes there at all. At least while you're at the table with a potential buyer and a developer, you have the ability to help massage what that ends up looking like. So whether you like apartments or not, some do, some don't. Some appreciate the value they bring in, some don't. It's a personal thing of many boards, who deal with this decision. If you don't, then someone might do it anyway, and there's no buffer, and you can't control that. So that's the trade-off. Whether or not you like what they're proposing or not, if you say no, then now, as Brian mentioned a minute ago, City of Conroe does have ETJ and has utilities not far from here. So that is an option for them. And then if they went that route, for instance, they would have to follow whatever design standards Conroe has, which are not what the Woodlands are, as far as the standards go, whether it's tree buffer or whatever you would be looking for. So just kind of laying it all out there, that's something to consider when thinking about consideration for this property.
If we said no and they go to Conroe, does Conroe have the same drainage standards that the township?
Yeah, then it would.
County standard.
County level.
So we wouldn't endanger either way. These residents on the back end wouldn't be any more in danger to flood.
Yes and no. Most likely, no, there wouldn't be any change. One of the opportunities that you do have, if it's a tract that you're gonna annex, is we can take a little bit harder look at what the proposed drainage that they're proposing, and maybe give them some additional requirements.
Beef it up a little bit.
Potentially, we could get into that conversation.
Would they need to put a retention pond on their property?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
I would expect it. Yeah, for sure. I don't think they aren't to the point where they're just doing due diligence. So it sounded like they haven't done any preliminary engineering to identify what's where, and they'd have to do.
They just found a nice piece of land and thought this might be a great idea.
Yeah, a little bit more to it than that, but yeah, essentially they have, the developer has some relationships with the property owner, and that's how they got brought
And
in.
it's owned by a company of sorts. It's not the same.
Yeah, what's?
Yeah, it says venture. That's
It's a company that owns land
Right.
and, you know, looks.
has a relationship with it. And it's about 78, let's call it $80 million of projected assessed value
No doubt.
once all built.
Not a lot of downside.
But we would have the ability to control that things like part of their development is to put in retention ponds, build that in somehow in their complex, or we can't.
No,
we
the
can't-
county will require them to follow the minimum drainage standards. And so that will likely create the requirement to do detention and all that. You know, where it flows, at what rates. I mean, we want to look at all that. We want to look at the interface of the property lines. You know, where does the drainage go? How are they going to redirect it? You know, because you can, in my experience, you can meet the minimum standards and still have an effect, unwanted effect on the surroundings. So
I'm glad you admitted that.
just want to make sure.
Well, that, and you've got all these property owners here that you want to have some sort of a buffer that you have very upset people that has thought they had this beautiful backyard that has trees, and now all of a sudden they're looking at an ugly 4-story Section 8 apartment complex, and the noise and everything that goes with it, and yet they bought their properties thinking they had peaceful woodlands.
That would.
No?
That would.
Well,
yeah.
but I mean, would we have the ability to put in some sort of a green buffer for the,
That's what he's talking about.
okay,
That's one of the advantages
Yeah.
of annexing.
You start to build some of that control.
right,
Say, hey, we really like, first off, you're gonna meet woodland standards,
right.
if the woodlands even agrees to it.
Mm.
And then secondarily, if then to meet those standards, then secondarily, the MUD would like to see something different or something beefed up or whatever the case.
Which shoe drops first, Mud 47 or Township?
Well, I think that something that needs to occur is we need to identify if you even have capacity. And if capacity can be identified or acquired. Within the sixth and final accounting, there were certain capacities that each district has, but this track certainly wasn't in there. So, whether or not there's some excess at the moment based on, how everything else turned out from sixth and final, I don't know that.
Craig, I think we would want to have as a condition to annexation that the township would have to annex the property so that we could ensure before the MUD annexed it, that property was in fact subject to Woodlands covenants and standards. So that,
We don't own any property that's not
and we
Township.
can't sell. But, we can have requirements, in the annexation agreement for maybe, a larger buffer along the southern boundary and eastern boundary where those homes are. But that would be potentially on top of what the woodland standards would be, but we wouldn't want to annex that property until the township did to ensure that that baseline of standards were in place. I mean, yeah, you get about, based on your current tax rate, you get around $130,000, it looks like, of tax revenue a year. That's great, but is that really sufficient to fiddle with this?
It's not gonna ring the bell.
No, it's, can you protect your residents more
Yeah.
by having the property in your district than
Right.
having it out of your district? that to me is really what it's.
To a district that has a lot smaller tax base, this would be a big deal.
Yeah.
But to you, it's a, doesn't really
Yeah,
move
right,
the
$1
needle
billion
on
tax
the,
base.
on the money side. Yeah, I mean, it's still money, but it's, yeah.
And they've, part of the other conversation was that then we'd be willing to look at, I mean, they have a list of enhanced design standard ideas that they provided, which, is bigger setbacks and different facades and things like that, tree preservation. There was also part of the conversation that said, maybe you would like something else to be built, which was kind of interesting that they're gonna, we could talk to you about some other things. I think the landowner is coming to this developer with this kind of company to see what they come up with from an apartment perspective, but they maybe do something else. So,
Well, I think he mentioned that, at one
he
point,
said pickleball should be great.
well, at one point they asked about it and they did an initial analysis to see if there was a better use. And, they do market studies on
Yeah.
might sell and what might work in certain areas. And he said, this actually is ranking really high.
Yeah.
As being something that particular area would need.
They're coming in a very, I think, conciliatory way to say, help us figure out how we can help, solve this problem if you're kind of wanting to. So,
I would like to ask what the service would look like. So I understand that if the Woodlands annexes this, SJRA will provide their water and their sewer. We know where that goes. If Conroe annexes the land, would they have a package plant on the property, or would they hook into Conroe's pipes? How would
Apparently there's facilities across the street.
Yeah,
across-
so
that Conroe?
there's 3 different service options. There's Woodlands, through the River Authority in Nutt. There's Conroe tapping into the water and sewer that Conroe has along 1488. Or they go it alone and do something on their track that would maybe have a private water well and septic. You could do some industrial buildings like that. You could do some other maybe
400 units.
Septic for horses.
That's not
No,
common.
no,
Industrial.
industrial.
So not do apartments.
Not apartments. You could do
Okay.
industrial,
Yeah.
you could do other types of construction, type of projects, lay down yards, things that aren't super high value, probably a more nuisance to your residents than other things. But that's what they would probably be looking at if they were having to go it alone, because you couldn't have density with a private well and septic.
So we would, if MUD 47 approves this, we would write in the clause, it's got to be apartments only. They can put an industrial
Well-
designation.
So we, again, we don't zone, but we could have requirements related to buffering and how much capacity that the district would be willing to provide. If they were in the township, then they would have to get, approval for, deed and covenant restriction compliance for whatever uses they were looking at. So if it wasn't multifamily, then they would be going to.
So that'd be the harder fight, would be with the township.
Correct, and that's why we want to make sure that they're in the township before we would
Yeah,
annex the
okay.
property. That's not our fight.
So we told them that we'd be meeting, we discussed this. There's no action that we're really taking tonight. I don't think. This is just is that right? Yeah, we're just a discussion.
More of a barometer. What are the thoughts?
Yeah, is it a no-go? Is it, let's consider it, amongst, as of ourselves, kind of a straw.
We gotta see if there's capacity. That's the first thing, whether we even consider it.
Well, I think before that, I think you need to decide,
You want an apartment there?
do you want to control what goes there?
I mean, I don't want apartments there, but, not have that option.
I think for the sake of these residents, it's in our interest to control or have some influence.
Yeah.
So I say, yeah.
Apartments are gonna be the bigger consumer.
Yeah.
Versus
CUEs.
anything else.
And God knows apartments are coming up 1488.
They're all.
Then you can buck
That
that trend. don't you?
1488, sometimes you can look down and just can't even see when they end. They're just
Yeah, I mean,
8 deep.
And so is there gonna be a lot of people in there? They're gonna be probably zoned to Mitchell and things like that.
That was one thing that did come up,
Yeah.
that this track is a bit of an anomaly in that it is actually zoned to Magnolia.
Oh.
Yeah.
Really? Well, that's very interesting. Okay.
And they also did a study.
Yeah, they wanted to point that out to the group.
And they referred to a study that said, there's an impression that there's like 3 kids that live in every apartment.
No.
And he said, a lot, there's a lot. And they're, I forget what the exact number was, a very, very small number, according to all the ones that they're building up and down this area. That it's a very, very small number, like a fraction of what people think comes with apartments.
And it's 0 to CISD is what I just heard.
Yeah,
How the school district to divvy that up, I mean, I guess,
Magnolia.
yeah.
And if they're selling this as class A, whatever that is, apartments, it's probably gonna attract a higher income, which might have no kids.
And what if you put in like a 55+ community?
Look at the other apartments that are all.
Yeah, no, but yeah, what I'm saying is that if they've got the money, if it's a high-end apartment, then they probably buy a house if they've got kids. I think that's the preference.
No, but I mean, what if you did a 55+ community? Because there you have people that have money, but they don't want a house because they don't want the maintenance or
That's a good point.
anything, and
That's a good
they're
point.
willing to pay high end. And that's something we don't really have a lot of, excluding
Yeah.
the Section 8, but we don't really have any high end. Del Webb's
Del
right
Webb,
down the street.
sure.
It's all built out. So people that don't want to live in Del Webb anymore because they don't want to take care of their lawn, move over here, and they don't have any problem with paying
I'm sure they know the demographic.
$2,500 a month for
I
rent.
mean, these big investment companies, they can probably tell you to the penny.
But if you put that kind of a high-end complex in one, it's not going to be 4 stories high. It's probably going to be like 1 or 2 because seniors don't like to be, that high. But you would have a nicer clientele in there.
Mm.
So for all of the residents that live here, you wouldn't be having all of the noise factor that comes with apartments because 55+ communities are quiet.
So am I hearing that our kind of leaning is, it's not no. We want to know more, maybe.
Yeah.
And we feel like what's driving us is being able to control. We don't think the financial outcome is really gonna be much, but it's gonna be something.
Very
And
good.
it's worth taking another step for them.
Sure.
We're all saying.
Free option.
Yep.
Check it out.
Do you have to spend money on a feasibility study to understand the capacity? And when do you think that happens in the process?
It's interesting because that's not what typically is done, but I think that there's some level of feasibility that needs to occur. We need to identify, I think, in my opinion, a physical or an official ask from them. Then we can utilize that to then talk to SGRA about, okay, what's the options? Right now, all we have is a discussion and some rough land plans and they clearly are, rough. So we would need to know an official ask of how much capacity they think they're going to need. And then we can start talking to SGRA about capacity. We could look within your 6 final and see if there's anything there. And then look to SGRA to see if we even if there's some excess capacity in the system. I think someone's going to probably also need to look at just conveyance as well. Do the lines up there have capacity to serve 300 or 400 units? It may be that it doesn't. I mean, there's a good possibility that, as you go out away from your plants, the lines, and you go into the subdivisions, the lines get smaller, so now you're tapping in at that point.
Mhm.
So is there a larger line that might need to be run somewhere just for them to even get to some?
That's a lot to figure out before we know whether we're gonna.
Of course, yeah, there's definitely some more due diligence, and probably some engineering that needs to be done. That's something that, we can, I think we go back to them and say, okay, it's not a no. We need to investigate more and see where this goes, but they'd be willing to, the board would be willing to, based on these things.
Sure.
So we need some more information from them.
Does anybody know if that's Riley's or Noak's area?
Should be Raleigh.
Riley?
back there in the northeast quadrant.
When do you recommend that we kind of touch base with the township? Sooner rather than later?
Not before we determine capacity, because there's no discussion to have if there's not capacity.
Good, thanks, everyone. So we're here
16.
to do. General Manager's Report.
I think we've covered everything except for communications.
All right.
You wanna?
Everyone snag a supplemental communications report. You'll see we have some outreach events. That probably is on your Google Calendar too, if you want to revisit that. Please join us at any or all of those. Great way to connect with folks and hear what their concerns and questions and all that are. On page 2 at the bottom, I want to give you a few numbers on social media and note that Nextdoor, we started at the beginning of the year and that's been a really successful tool for us. We've got significant reach there. We're almost 38,000 households. And we're getting about 4,000 reads a month, or excuse me, a week on our posts. Post twice a week, average about 2,000 reads. That's a good tool. We don't respond to comments there, but it is good to see what the comments are.
Still recording.
Education for us. We are now a proud sponsor of Woodlands Online Sports. So they have all the live high school sports for College Park and Woodlands High. So we're a major sponsor, so we'll have commercials, prominent advertising there, as well as advertising throughout the larger site. I think it's about 100,000 views. It's a great segment of the community for us to be managed in swap the demographics there. Family-oriented engaged in the community. So we're excited about that opportunity. And then lastly, I'll let Eric make a note about recent developments with Holloway Communications.
Yes, so we've been through the PEC, we've been working with the PR firm. We'll get an opportunity to look at the drafted or built website before the public does. The things that they've been developing for us is some criteria in building a community working group or work group, which will assist in the campaign process as we go through the education of the community on aging infrastructure. They've developed a kind of a mixed group from MUD directors, village association members, community members, township, Howard Hughes, SRA would have representatives on it. And so I wanted to let everybody know, to start thinking about it. We'd like to identify an individual from each MUD. So planting seed, you can talk among, if anyone has any interest in wanting to be on that working group, name for that for next month. I'd like to select, get all the MUDs taken care of as far as the group, and then
The obligation would probably be no more than a meeting a month, maybe be less than that. And it probably would go out a year or so for whenever until the working group's not needed. But wanted to make sure that there was community involvement.
I'll volunteer.
Yep, I'll go.
And just
Sorry.
so y'all can fight for it. But, or think about it for next month, whatever, but yeah, I'll
No. Yeah, real. I'm cool. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, that's it. Thank you, John. All right, for the trustee report. Anything else on that?
lot about the hallway conversation there going on.
Yeah, there was a lot of, I mean, it's all written there in the report. Want to add other than what's in there?
Covered it well. Okay, we don't need to stuff, we've done that, that means we don't need to reconvene, we've done that. Comments from public and more, any items for future agenda? Anything to talk about? Thank you, so we are adjourned.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.